Welcome to What Works, where nonprofit leaders share stories about what makes impact possible and their organizations thrive. I'm your host, Marla Moody, and today we're going to talk about the unique challenges and opportunities of stepping into a nonprofit as a new CEO. My guest, Justus Zimmerman, is now leading the Austin Symphony Orchestra with the background in arts marketing, creative entrepreneurship, and a passion for building communities. He brings a fresh perspective and even bold energy to nonprofit leadership. So get ready. Justus, tell us what works. Welcome, Justus. I've been looking forward to this time. I'd love if you would to give maybe a little bit more introduction to who you are and even how you made it to be the CEO, president of the Austin Symphony Orchestra.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Coach Marla. What works is a big topic. So my journey was I grew up in New England in a small town. We didn't even have a traffic light, and had a lot of independent play outside and self-development there. I was a big actor in high school and in grade school and ultimately in college. I discovered rock climbing when I was in high school. After college, I realized that I hadn't done a whole lot of marketable skill building, but I had done quite a bit of acting and rock climbing. And I thought, what better place to do that than Southern California, which famously has Hollywood, but it also is kind of the birthplace of modern rock climbing in America. So I moved out to LA to be an actor and spent a long time auditioning and taking classes and these kinds of things. And out of that experience, came up with a children's product with a friend, which is sort of a leap. So we were intent on encouraging creativity in the young and young at heart. And we started building arts and crafts kits. Ultimately, I became the sales and marketing end of that endeavor. I was doing trade shows across North America and selling these kits. My partner was more the product brain. He was coming up with the ideas and some of those things. We were working together on sourcing materials, manufacturing, and putting together all of that kind of behind the scenes infrastructure you need to launch a physical product. Ultimately, I think of that as like my crash course MBA because there was a whole lot of learning the hard way that was accomplished, including understanding that different markets are of different sizes and the American toy market has very thin margins. So ultimately discovered that was never going to pay the bills to the degree I would like them paid. At that point, I'd been acting and then working for myself ultimately for more than a decade, and I was kind of sick of working for myself. I wanted a desk job in someone else's office. I had a friend who was in charge of the special events at the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. I ended up in the marketing department there. I'd been an actor, and so I had an appreciation for the performing arts, but I'd never really been exposed to orchestral music. And lo and behold, I had landed at one of the top chamber orchestras in North America. So it was a really wonderful experience to learn a side of the classical music industry at a very high level. I ultimately took over the marketing department there. That went well enough that I became the executive director at the South Bend Symphony, South Bend, Indiana. Then that went well enough that I'm now down here in Austin as the CEO. So that's kind of the short version.
I love it. Yeah, when we mentioned before, I kind of had assumed that you played an instrument, but you came from a different arts view. There's of course so many wonderful arts. I think I mentioned to you I was a violinist. I wanted to be a professional violinist and a rock climber. And if you know that rock climbing hands and violinist hands are different hands.
Yeah,
So
different skill set. I mean, both require strength, but different kinds of strength, right?
indeed. Indeed. So I grew up only going to classical concerts. I had to actually find rock music once I was in my 30s. So
Yes, yes.
so you see the value of arts. What whether it's the performing arts of different ways, but especially in the musical arts, how does that positively impact a society or a community.
I think there are a lot of ways. I mean, people are quick to point out studies about the mind and music or the celebration of human endeavor, which is a symphony, all these disparate parts coming together to work as one. My favorite thing that the performing arts do, and especially classical music without words to hang our brains on, is that they get us sharing a space with people who we may not agree with on much, but we can turn off the analytical side of our brain and have an emotional experience in a group of people that is, you can't really translate it into words, but there's a community in that. Even if that community only lasts for a couple hours, I do think that it increases the overall empathy quotient of the people in that room, and they carry that empathy into the rest of their lives. I think it has a perhaps hidden effect on society, but I believe it's a really profound effect ultimately.
That's a really good point, especially with a world right now that feels pretty divided and even maybe challenging to talk to your neighbor if they differ in views than you have. There's some kind of leveling
Yeah.
when it comes to especially the classics. The classics were cutting edge back in their
Oh,
day, but now
they were pop
go ahead.
music. They were pop music.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's something inherently appealing about them, right? It's not just esoteric soundscapes. There's melody, and there's harmony, and there's deeply human things that are easily graspable for the most part in classical music. There is the esoteric stuff. But
Yes.
yeah, I mean, I can't think of other places in our world right now where you would happily sit next to someone of the opposite political persuasion and maybe even have a conversation with them. I think that stuff used to happen in more parts of society. We used to, a lot of people would go to church for some of this community building, but I think the arts are one of the last pure vestiges we have of this communal experience. To your point, in today's world, it's ever more critical that these arts organizations and that arts experiences are made available to the widest possible public, because we could all use a little bit more empathy, I think.
Indeed. And if bringing us back to our humanness, which is like you mentioned, we're touching in that emotional piece of it rather than just that the wordsmithing piece of it. So that's I really really love that.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm an English major. I love the wordsmithing piece, but there is something about music that helps you get out of what we've thought of as the left brain and have a little bit more of a full experience.
Lovely. Lovely. The more we can do that, I think the better.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you're newer at the Austin Symphony Orchestra, and there's some unique challenges to stepping into a role as a CEO in something that was maybe managed or led differently than you are leading. I'd love for you to just paint a little bit of a picture of, in any appropriate way, a little bit of the setting, um, and what did you even have to do to start learning to even know what to do, what to keep, what to change, how to align people?
So that's a big topic. One of my kind of unofficial mentors is currently running the League of American Orchestras, Simon Woods, and he recommended this book, The First 90 Days, to me, which I've used now both in South Bend and here. I don't know if your listeners know that book, but it's a great little crash course in joining a new organization and all the things you have to consider. Specifically here in Austin, the orchestra is 115 years old. We reside in a city that considers itself the live music capital of the world, but does not include the symphony as part of that definition.
Really?
Yeah, when we think of Austin and when the live music scene in Austin thinks of itself, it's punk rock, it's indie, it's all the kind of more pop aligned independent music that really made Austin what it is, as well as the Willie Nelsons and that kind of outlaw country thing. Those are kind of the two sides of it. There's hip hop, there's jazz, there's everything exists here. But when we think of the live music scene in Austin, it's outlaw country and indie rock. But then we have this orchestra that is well over 100 years and was founded in a time when Austin was a small city. It's just in the last 30 years or so that Austin has ballooned into one of the largest cities in America. So there's all the growing pains that the city is dealing with. The symphony is also dealing with those. How do we serve a public that is very different from the public that we started out trying to serve? How do we create music for a whole bunch of people that don't know that they are interested in classical music? Um, because Austin has become such a tech hub, between that and the music, we have a very young city. I think the median age is like 28 or something, which is not your traditional symphonic audience. There are certainly plenty of 20 somethings that love symphonic music, but statistically, they're not the largest group. So we have that kind of inherent challenge in serving audiences here that every orchestra has, but most orchestras are in cities where the median age is in the 40s or at least the late 30s, which means that there's a much larger percentage of the population that is your traditional symphony goer, over 60. Um, so that is one thing. I think the arts in general have gone through an incredible period of growth in the last 20 years of the administrative side of the arts professionalizing, and starting to look to the for-profit sector for what works, and trying to take lessons from that and applying them to our work as appropriate. I was just reading this interesting article on how universities have done that and how do you bridge fiscal solvency and not losing your soul, which I think is kind of a false duality, but I appreciate the concern there. So the short answer to your question of what it is to come into an organization, number one is an assessment of the people. And in a nonprofit, we have boards, we have staff members, and we have stakeholders. And then in a orchestra or many arts organizations, we also have the artists themselves, the musicians, which are kind of this fourth group of people. So assessing them and what they need, what they're contributing, and where we need to move those different groups of people. And then also the second big thing is the direction of the organization in general. Do I, as the new CEO, understand where this organization is trying to go? Whether or not I agree with it, do I at least understand it? I think most of us will get stopped there because whether or not we agree or disagree, I think it's actually incredibly hard to figure out where a lot of these arts organizations want to go. Most boards that are hiring arts executives, and this may be true in other sectors, but I don't have that experience, but I think a lot of them are looking to a music director or a CEO to come in and give them the answers. They have opinions on different things, but there's no clearly defined sense of this is where we would like to be, typically. I was going to say less true of for-profits. I think it's probably very true in many for-profits. It's just the most successful ones have figured that out, and those are the ones we tend to talk about. It may sound obvious to a listener of where do we want to be? Well, we want to be doing as much high-quality classical music as possible, or we want to balance the budget, run a surplus every year. But on the first point, we want to do the best, most classical music is sort of unsatisfying if you care about educational opportunities or community engagement opportunities, or if you don't have the budget of a LA Philharmonic. Like how are you, what does that mean to be doing the most classical music? Does it mean doing the cutting edge stuff, or does it mean doing Beethoven as good as anyone can do it? So there's nuance there. And then in terms of balancing the budget, a lot of people, I've heard multiple boards, ones I don't even work with, say like that's the goal, end in the black. And that's not the goal. We're a nonprofit. The goal is to serve the mission. So we need to define what mission success looks like. Balancing the budget is the bare minimum, but that's not what success looks like. That's just one of the things you have to do on the way to success.
So it's almost the short-sightedness or it's not just the black, although important, but that concept of why do we exist? What is the value? Which is why I started with that first question. Because, like, if you exist but aren't serving a purpose, there's other places people can put their time and talents.
Absolutely. It's even more fraught because we don't have the resources to pay for the best people. We have to get the best people because they believe in the mission. Especially right now in America, at least, there's this big conversation about do nonprofits, especially in the arts, deserve public subsidy or not? And we've seen the Trump administration claw back some of that or create some rules around what counts and what doesn't. Even more locally, there's a constant conversation with whatever city you're in about justifying city resources for the art that you're creating. How do I make the pitch that they should give us money when that money could go straight to homeless services? So it's really important to have a really clear idea of the value you create and believe in that value.
Yes. And what I'm hearing too is that clarity, which is, it always starts with value. I have a leadership framework, and you have to start with value. Because if you don't have that value, and if that mission value doesn't line up with your personal value, there's a dissonance that's going to eventually pull apart. But the clearer your personal and mission value go, then the stronger that messaging, where that clear vision goes. And with that clear vision, then people can come along.
Yeah, right.
So how did you as a person, and then you as the CEO of this big thing that has so many pieces, including donors, artists, and administrative, how did you come along with kind of really nailing that vision of what and why in order to be able to communicate that out?
I think personally it's been a journey. I had formative experiences as a young person being involved in theater and the performing arts. So I saw the personal value and the what it had done in my own life in terms of developing me as a person. I'd also been an audience member and had that experience of what it had done for me in my personal life as an audience member. So those were easy things to kind of connect with early on. But then as I started dealing with bigger and bigger budgets and convincing people to give me resources at the expense of someone else, I've continued to develop. We had an interesting program in South Bend where inmates at the center where you go, kind of a transitional housing between prison and back into society, they would come to each of our concerts. The experience that those men were having at the South Bend Reentry Center was like another shot in the arm of like, there is tangible value to the arts. And it's not it's tangible, but it's hard to write down if you haven't seen it in person. We get filled up as leaders when we can, and then you ride with that fuel for as long as you can.
When how do you like the need for effective, clear messaging and consistent communication from the board members to your staff and team, to the donors? What are some of the things you've seen that you've done well, or even some things that you wish you would have done differently in light of framing a clear message and communicating that message out consistently?
Yes. I think on the road to having done well, I'm really a fan of this concept of having a North Star for the business. If you can take your mission and you can quantify that mission and make that the North Star, or even if you can't quantify it, but that really helps align messaging with staff and with board and with anybody that's working for your company. And then it takes a version and some interpretation of that North Star to communicate to the public, to the donors, to the patrons, to other stakeholders. One of the things that I believe in the performing arts is that we talk about empathy, we talk about building community and all of these things. I think kind of the dumbest, in a good way, crystallization of that concept is how much time people are choosing to spend with us. It's very hard to do a longitudinal study and see how much empathetic that person became over the next 10 years. But I can say people are choosing to spend this many hours with us in a given year when they don't have to. And that's going up or that's going down. That becomes a very clear goal for the staff, the board, and the musicians to say, like, look, our goal is to have people spend as much time with us as possible. So let's see how we can attack that. And then messaging to the public and the donors and patrons is your support creates this much opportunity for people, or it allows 5 children to attend this education thing that we have, or it allows whatever it is. But it's one step removed from that North Star metric.
That's a really interesting point I hadn't thought about with the arts, is looking at analytics. because you can say, well, this is good because it feels good, but to say, what is our goal? But then are we reaching it? And how do you have smart goals or tangible goals in order to say, are we succeeding or not? So I like that you say there's not an empathy meter at the end of the,
Yeah, hit the green
maybe that
button
would
with
be
the red
good.
button.
Yeah, wouldn't that be cool? They come through and they have different
I'm a
colors
better
and
person.
actually,
Click. That's
you could do a poll at the end.
right.
I slept. I'm a better person.
I'm at least more
But
interested.
but finding measurable goals that are kind of guesses. Like, of course, the classic one is we want people to be safer in the work. We're assuming if they're wearing hats and safety goggles, they're going to be safer. So you can measure that. Then you can see how many accidents there
Right.
have been. And so with the idea of, are people wanting to spend more time with you or less, you're seeing more people, the amount of time, and then of course translating that into community service was what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Yeah. My opinion is that it translates in each direction. So the more time people are spending with you, you're building a community. They're
mm,
spending time with you, they're coming back, they're choosing to do things in community with you. But I also think that over time we will see that patrons who spend more time with us tend to give more money, which is the other side of that equation. I think it's a
right.
virtuous cycle. And there's that whole thing about, the second the goal becomes the only goal, the goal stops being meaningful. I forget what law that is. So we do want to be careful to remember that we're not trying to game the goal. We're trying to get at the mission and what is the best encapsulation that
Yes.
we can see there.
So as you came on and you obviously wanting to be going from red to black, where did you find some rub spots? Was it employees that were resistant to change, or where did you find some of those challenges?
In a number of places, I think in an organization this old, there is a lot of inertia in how things have always been done. So it's almost inherent to the art form. There's this great respect for the past, right? We still listen to Beethoven and still love Beethoven. And it's hard to both say that is still good and also what we've been doing has been bad and I'm going to change all of that stuff. So I'm sensitive to the fact that this art form may attract people who would rather not see change so rapidly. But there's a lot of sacred cows and a lot of feeling like it has always worked out, so why be stressed? I can understand both of those opinions. Unfortunately, it's my job to not be satisfied with either of those. And I think it's everywhere, right? Like it's some employees that don't want to change. It's certain musicians that don't want to do things differently. It's board members, it's donors. Everyone has a good reason for wanting what they want. And I think the challenge of being the CEO is to be able to cut through all that and offer a compelling vision for why different makes sense at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of actually connects to what you were just saying about you don't want to just do things because they feel good. In some ways, that's been my special power because I don't come from an orchestral background. I am very unencumbered by my own personal opinion on certain things. Whereas I think a lot of people come to this from being a musician and they have great respect for certain traditions. It cuts both ways, honestly. But that's the trick is like subserving your own ego to what actually the organization needs. In some ways, that's the hardest thing.
Yeah. I loved your phrase, as a CEO, in a sense you're paid not to be satisfied with where the status is. Like there is always that, what does it look like to do better, to do the best, to be the best you can be. And that perspective is feels healthy. And it almost gives you that excuse to say, yes, and yes, this has been good. I'm not dismissing that, but I want to do even better.
I think that's where I fall down a lot is I'm always in the yes and let's do better thing. I think sometimes the hardest part about being a CEO is having that aggression and those feelings and not forcing them on other people who aren't yet equipped to deal with that change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is where I've gotten into trouble before is trying to do everything all at once because
Yes.
I don't see why not. Maybe that comes with maturity and age and being like, okay, I've made that mistake before. And now I understand that I have to parcel these things out. In fact, I just saw a quote from Jeff Bezos. He hired a CEO at Amazon. And the guy was basically like, Jeff, you can't give all these ideas at once. You have to parcel them out at one at a time. You're killing us. I don't know, that really hit home of like the staff, the board, everyone's doing such a good job. I can be unsatisfied, but I can't make anyone else feel the full brunt of that.
Mm. Yeah, there's that balance between vision of the future and being stable as well. Like
Right.
there's some need for stability in the midst of change.
Right. Right. Because my mind is always thinking about what could we be doing better. Sometimes I forget that I need to celebrate what's happening right now and celebrate the people that are accomplishing things right now. So that's one personal thing that I've been working on.
I like that. Which kind of brings me to the success of any nonprofit, any business really is the personnel, right?
Yeah.
The people that are doing the job. What are ways that you are building them up and developing them as good workers, as your talent?
Right. I mean, man, that is in some ways the hardest question because I would expect many people listening to this podcast in similar positions where there aren't resources for a formal HR department, or there certainly aren't resources for a formal professional development program. And it's trying to ad hoc things together, sending people to conferences or giving them big projects to work on. But most of us also run pretty lean operations where there's always more work than hours, and it feels really hard to carve out time for professional development when that's going to come at the expense of direct operational things. It's something I'm still figuring out. In South Bend, I had tried to carve out time and encourage or maybe force everyone to carve out a certain amount of hours each week for learning about something. I had this very annoying staff meeting where every staff meeting, everybody would talk about what they had learned the last week before we got on to anything more important. Eventually, there was a mutiny, and they had me stop doing that because they were like, I don't want to learn anything else. So there's a balance in everything.
Yeah.
But I think it's ultimately comes down to giving people who want more the room to do more. I think that's it. Like when someone comes to me and says, I really want to go to this conference and here's why, man, I as the leader should be trying super hard to figure out how to make that happen. Because most people, even A players, are not always finding more learning opportunities that they could take on in addition to their current workload. So maybe that's the first answer is just do no harm. Just get out of the way and let people do some of that stuff.
It's interesting because you have all those sides where people just sometimes are learners and they just want to learn for the sake of learning, and they doesn't necessarily meet the goal or the need of their work. Sometimes you allow it for the sake of nourishing them as learners.
Yep.
And then what does it look like? I'm like, I just want to get down and get my job done.
Right. Right.
But what I'm hearing you say though is even though you're in process of learning this, is you're listening, and that's such an important piece of I'm not going to get it right, but I'm going to keep figuring this out.
Yeah.
There is something about a lean organization and development, like not having a formal plan or whatever. When do you just get down and get the work done? When would there be that value added of saying we're going to go and level up everybody with whatever? I love that you're kind of in process of figuring that out because there's no right answer, but there is a challenge. Keeping people, like finding talent is such an important thing. And then keeping people, so keeping talent and then developing talent. It's almost like 3 phases.
Totally.
And doing those well is more of a dance, I think.
Yeah.
Than
I think it takes real belief from whoever's making that decision to be able to say, I do believe in this person or in this learning opportunity, and I am actually going to de-emphasize something else that's operational and say, you know what, maybe we don't need to do that thing, which is hard. Most of us want to add. That's the other thing is coming into a new organization. Immediately the question is, what can we stop doing? Because most organizations have just accumulated programs and different things. We're not always careful about adding them for a mission-based reason or a bottom line reason.
There's reasons to stop. One could be budgetary.
Yep.
One could be chasing the tail, right? It sounds good, but it's not getting to mission. But to stop and evaluate and listen. Maybe the mission's changed over time. Like you mentioned,
Yep.
Austin is not the same place it was when it got started. And you mentioned when we talked before that you're trying to figure out even where does the symphony orchestra fit in Austin?
Yeah, right. How do we be an orchestra that is specific to Austin and not one that you could pick up and put in any American city? There are thousands of orchestras in America. They're all wonderful. You should go see them, hear them. But we want to be one that you can only hear in Austin.
The song's going through my head is Rodeo, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Although they play that in other places.
They do. But it has special significance down here in Texas.
That's what's going through my head right now, so I love it. Do you ever, and again, I'm just getting off a call with food insecurity, and they talked about ways to raise awareness for things like food banks. Do you ever partner to do awareness, or you do special things for awareness of different things in the community?
Yeah, sometimes we can help host a food drive at our concerts, and we can give some discounts for people that bring things like that, or we can highlight a toy drive, or there are lots of opportunities for that. I'm still kind of wrapping my head around what Austin specifically needs and what the partners look like there. But yeah, absolutely. We believe in the significance of what it is that we're doing, but we also believe that we're in a community, and sometimes we need to de-emphasize ourselves for what another need is in a certain time.
I think as we sort that out, figure that out, I could see the whole community be stronger, because there's something about the feel good of doing that. Even the type of music that would be played might be different. Yeah. Because you're in the arts world, there could be some really fun ways to raise community awareness and community culture, like bringing people together, like we were talking about before. Just sounds like an amazing responsibility.
Yeah, Austin is like a really great example of it, because you go to a concert and there's people in suit and tie and there's people in tie-dye shirts and flip-flops, and it's like, yes,
that's perfect.
This is what we want.
Love that. What would you like to kind of end this with? Whether it's vision, whether it's a lesson learned, what feels important to you right now?
That's a good question. I think maybe the lesson learned, you mentioned just a few minutes ago, this idea that you're never going to get it right, but you just keep trying. It would be so easy to be buried under feelings of having not got something right, because in a leadership position, people's livelihoods, people's self-worth, people's 40 to 60 hours a week can sometimes be determined very easily by how you treat them, or whether you move them out of the company, or whether you move them up in a company, and all of these things. Like they're really life-changing decisions for your employees, and incredibly easy to screw up. We probably all screw those up from time to time. In fact, maybe we screw them up more often than we get them right. Like there's that whole thing of it's lonely at the top. I think for me, I've been pushing against that for a long time, but there is this reality that there's a lot of responsibility in this position. I just had this conversation with some friends where they were complaining about the CEO at their job. And I immediately, of course, was like, well, you don't know all the things that are going on in that CEO's world and all the decisions. But in some ways, there's a responsibility there to just kind of shut up and like take it, because that's what we signed up for. We're going to get things wrong. Someone has to lead. Having that kind of ownership and a support system for the bad is probably important.
Oh, I so resonate with that. I remember when I was first named operations leader for North Africa, Middle East, and Central Asia. Immediately after I was named, I felt like I had a target on my back.
Yeah.
Because suddenly I was the problem for everything. Everybody came to me for their grievances. And I'm like, I just woke up. You wake up the new day and you have this title. I was announced, someone had a meeting with me like right after the meeting when it was announced in a bigger meeting. He's like, you need to come save our country. His operations leader was angry that he didn't become the leader, and truly could have taken down everything we were doing there. There is something about listening, asking good questions, not taking it personally.
Yeah.
And knowing that you have to be transparent on some things, but very discreet in others.
Right, which is a really hard balance.
It is. And you can't tell the whole story. That would be inappropriate and unkind. So there is that loneliness on top. And, what does it look like to support one another? To go, yeah,
And what does authenticity look like when you can't be completely transparent? Yeah.
exactly. Because transparency is inappropriate. And also, authenticity is important. Knowing how to listen, recognizing when we make mistakes, and then standing to our ground. There was a leader who I still don't know if I agreed with his thing, but he was changing the organization at a high level, and I strongly disagreed with it. But I held my tongue and I actually sat down and talked with him. But I'm like, maybe he's just ahead of me.
Hmm.
Like as a leader, we need to be discontent with the status quo. And I love that you said that. And also be willing to listen and understand. We kind of have to go, let's give this a try. A lot of times we'll see something that is not seeable yet to others. So there is that, can you give me the benefit of the doubt to give it a try?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's also that liability with leaders that sometimes we've chewed on it so long that it's just common logical to us because we've had time to process it.
Yes.
And so we don't deliver the concept in such a way that to give them the freedom to think about it and process it. You're nodding well. I'd love to.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's, at least personally, it's been one of my biggest communications challenges because you do tend to gnaw on it
Mhm.
quite a bit and think it through from all sides. But then it's easy to forget that no one else has gone on that journey and you have to
Yeah.
give them time to go on that journey.
Yeah. I'd say, underline that, emphasizing that as leaders, being willing to make change, but recognizing that people also need to have time to process it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that, oh, we just don't like change. There's some people that genuinely don't like change, right? But there's more people that just need that
Right.
process.
And everything is a spectrum, right? Maybe it's actually easier when you're in an emergency because then there's just less time. So
Right.
change, you just got to
Yeah,
make.
emergencies yeah, you just make an emergency and you're all good.
That's right. They call it Yarrick, right? That's what in falconry.
That's awesome. Well, we have gone longer than I'm supposed to go, but it's been just too delightful to talk to you. So I really, really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, this has been fun.
I know that we didn't talk about board members, but I'd like to bring you back on with a couple other people to just talk about the uniquenesses of building a strong
Mhm.
board and some of the difference between for-profit and nonprofit board members and all that. So expect a call from me. All right. Have a good day.